SOD West, coming at you from NTC, Off the Radar.
This is Off the Radar. I'm Captain Weston Rich, an observer coach trainer for the Green Berets at the National Training Center.
Special Forces has been at the forefront of U.S. military operations for over 70 years, taking part in actions across the full spectrum of operations ranging from competition to conflict. Special Forces soldiers stand ready to answer the nation's call, no matter where, when, or how they are needed. Yet, how do Special Forces prepare for their next mission? Why should Special Forces companies and teams come to the National Training Center? Welcome to Off the Radar. I'm your host, Captain Weston Rich. With us today to discuss these questions and more is Major Michael Hitzner, the current Special Operations Training Detachment West, OIC, also known as the Commander of Burro Team, the Special Operations Forces Observer Coach Trainer Team here at the National Training Center. All right, Major Hitzner, please provide a little bit of background on yourself, your experiences in special operations and at the National Training Center.
So, Major Mike Hitzner, I am currently the OIC for the Special Operations Training Detachment out here at NTC, also known as AOB-West or the Burro Team. So I've been in the Army a little over 16 years, been SF since 2014, so almost 10 years. Within SF, I've been a detachment commander in 5th Group, Battalion AS3 in 5th Group, and then a company commander in 5th Group as well, prior to coming out here to be the OIC. Coming into this, a little bit more background, deployments, 2 as conventional, both to Iraq. I was an infantryman, but I was in 1st Cav as a cavalryman, so I do own a Stetson and spurs. It's awesome.
Luckily, you don't wear it around the office, though.
No, that has a place in the closet. There's a funny story about us rebelling against our really high Cav trooper company commander, but that's for another time. But a lot of experience in Iraq and the Middle East. 2 deployments conventional, Kirkuk in 2009, and then Diyala in Baquba in 2011 for New Dawn, and that was prior to going. Then I went to selection after that. Within SF, a lot of experience in the Middle East, obviously as a 5th grouper. Deployment to Jordan, working with the JORSOF in more just persistent engagement mission in 15, and then in 16 in Task Force Turkey, operating with the counter-ISIS campaign in northwest Syria, doing what we call the engagement team, which was force generation of the irregular force for that operation. Then went back to Syria in 17 when I was the Battalion AS3 and 1st Battalion 5th Group. Worked at Siege of SOF Syria as the J33 for a little while, and then over in Syria with Task Force 9.5 as the current operations director. So a lot of time spent with contingency operations, counter-terrorism, counter-ISIS operations in Syria. As the commander of B of Bravo Company 2nd Battalion 5th Group, also had a deployment. We were AOB Central in Baghdad, and that was a persistent engagement mission with the Iraqi CTS. So we were more at the CTS operational leadership level, and the teams were with the CTS brigades. So that was a pretty good competition mission. A lot of those were competition. The de-ISIS stuff is not necessarily competition, but it's definitely not LSCO. But it was pretty close in terms of advising large partner forces with the Syrian Democratic Forces. So we can take a lot of those lessons learned and apply them to NTC as we prepare ODAs and AOBs primarily to focus on large-scale combat operations and high-intensity conflict. So a little bit about me. In the current position, I've been here almost 2 years now. The first year I spent as the AOB-West J3, or better known as the Exercise Control Director. So the guy that pulls all the strings in the background and keeps the exercise on the rails. And then for pretty much the last year, I've been the OIC, which in charge of the organization, but then the lead trainer for the AOB and the AOB commander specifically. So it's been pretty rewarding. But with that's the background. We'll kind of get into this. Over to you, Wesson.
Appreciate that detailed answer going into some of your operational experience. And obviously, you spent a lot of time growing up in the Army in the counterinsurgency, counterterrorism realm, and focused on that competition and crisis rather than full out conflict. How do you think that training and operations that you've experienced helped you in your current role trying to prepare detachments and companies for large scale conflict?
Yeah, I take a lot away from the things we did when I was a young detachment commander, and I owe most of this to my first team sergeant. I mean, who's now Sergeant Major John Witherspoon in 5th Group, but his philosophy, which I agree with, was the basics. Mm-hmm. We're going to focus on the basics, and part of this was due to the time that we had in between deployments during this time. It was, I was on an ODA for 2 years. I did 2 deployments. I was on for 6 months. I was off for 6 months. Never did a concept as a team leader. All we did in between those deployments, because it was really all we had time to do, was re-hone the basics. And all my team sergeant did, his training plan was basically built off the SOP book that the ODA had. We had a pretty strong SOP book, which not all ODAs have. We were fortunate enough. And we would just go out on a weekly basis and train deliberately through the SOP book. I mean, how often do you see an ODA out there? It was like I was in ROTC again. I couldn't believe it. We were out there in the field, going through Battle Drill 1 Alpha, walking through it on day 1 of we're retraining this. Flash forward 3 months, we were out there. We take the ODA to the field for 3 days, and we trained everything live fire, mounted, mounted, dismounted, and that was the culmination of our collective training. We didn't even have time to do it with a partner force. Now, looking back on it, I would have loved to get some 101st guys out there to participate with us, and that would be my recommended change.
Yeah,
but that's what our home station training was like at that time. And we went down range and we did that. And then we went with the JORSOF and we were able to train them in all those basics because we were honed in on it. We knew everything we how to do it and how to do it live fire. And then we can translate that and train the Jordanians do the same. What was interesting about that deployment is, and it's all about what teams can do when you're out there, is, the range in Jordan was a helicopter range, and it was basically, there's the mountain. So almost every weekend, every other weekend, we're going to do heavy weapons. And we just continued training all that. The reason why I say, train the basics and why I really believe in this is, at a fundamental level, if you can do that, you're preparing for your worst day, more so high intensity conflict.
Yeah.
And you can train partner forces to help you, do that. The basics of shoot, move, communicate, and then add in survive, as well.
Maybe medicate. Yeah.
And and absolutely medicate. And we did all this medical cross training.
Yeah.
And that was the limit of it. So when I look at it, and we go to exercises prior to deployments and things, I only did one. It was in between my second one. That was the only time we did a battalion level PMT.
Okay. But,
when you're in the Q course and people are telling you, hey, missions are a competition. There's more missions, or there's more ODAs than there are missions. And it's a meritocracy. You compete for missions, the best ODAs get the best missions. This battalion PMT truly was. There were 7 ODAs there. There was only 4 missions. One of them was pretty much spoken for because it was from another company. So you really had 3 ODAs competing for 6 missions. And I know this was the case because our battalion warrant later on, told us this. And a lot of the other teams were doing all this, sexy stuff and concepts and things like that. We came out of that as the number 1 team. We never did concept. All we did was train our SOPs.
Just having the basics
down. The pure basics, because at a fundamental level, that was what the training was rooted in. And everything else, you just utilize your higher skills that guys have gone off and individually trained. We focused heavily on that. We had close to the old 350-1 requirements. ODA is supposed to have this many jump masters, this many JTACs, this many level 2s and 3s and level 1 snipers. We got pretty close to it. to say, hey, this is the capability we're going to build. And those guys maintain their capability. They cross-train the team. But then as a collective, we just came together as a unit. Because then you can do the basics and all those other branch higher-end skills. You have the capability and you can do it when it's asked. But what you have to do all the time is just fundamentals.
Yeah.
Other than that, the one thing that we really focused on, our one pure collective event was we did a cephalic as a team. We brought in a lot of new guys. And I see the higher value of cephalic as not for the CQB aspect. Because, I'll probably bring this up later, is, shooting holes in paper inside a house in LSCO, probably not, too relevant, or probably your focus is a little off if you're training there.
Yep. I've heard you say that.
Yeah. And we'll probably explain why, for why I think that. But the value of that is there's no better way to build a team than blowing doors, a room off, and shooting a meter off your buddy's barrel for like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So as a team cohesion event, that's where I see it's perspective. Hey, we're doing this event to build our cohesive team and learn everybody and hone in our SOPs and know how to operate together. That's, I think, where your training perspective is on cephalic. And yes, you'll get better at house and CQB and all that kind of stuff. But I would argue if you didn't do that in LSCO, you're probably having a bad day.
Yeah.
And somebody else is probably doing that. You still need to know how to do it so you can train your partner force to go do that and execute. But, as individual, Green Berets that aren't in a CTAC company.
Yeah. So you talked a lot about your experiences at the detachment level. So as a company commander, and you deployed forward as a company commander, did you have a pre-mission training for the AOB, or did you make your detachments do something? And have you ever been to a CTC as a SOF guy?
So, my command time was interesting because I took command downrange.
Okay.
The company was already there for about half a month before I came in, but I did have the chance because I was identified for that company. I did have the chance to go to their pre-mission training, and that was largely geared around unilateral operations, a lot of contingencies in it, but it was kind of rooted on the basics, but I couldn't really tell is it training for PMT? I think it was more of just a collective training evaluation.
Okay.
More so for the battalion commander to put his stamp on, yep, these guys are at a proficient level. And I think the battalion's perspective was similar to mine in, hey, if we're at a fundamental basic of they do the fundamentals well, they do the basics well, they know their operation, they know their SOPs, you can adapt that to whatever you're doing, competition, LSCO. So what was interesting for that deployment was, yes, we were in Iraq, we had the CTS, but it was mainly a advisory mission. So a competition mission for the most part. Yes, there was still some de-ISIS things going on, but we weren't in the lead. We weren't running any ops. We were pushing them through all their operations. So it was kind of interesting. It was more so, I think, just an ex-eval as opposed to a PMT.
Okay.
What it definitely wasn't is a CTC LSCO type future, what we think a high intensity conflict might look like in the future. So when we look at CT at a CTC, can it serve as that? Yes, but I think it's built for something different.
Agreed. So switching more towards talking about the National Training Center and what a combat training center is, in your opinion, what's the value proposition for Special Forces to come to NTC? And is there anything they can get here that they can't get elsewhere in a training environment?
This is something I usually open up with the AOBs when they come here. We do this thing right before the rotation starts. It's called Exercise ROE. But it's also trying to get people in the right mindset to train at NTC. Because what we see is the value that they get out here is largely based on the mindset that the training unit comes out here with. So we try to give them a little bit of context of why this place is important. And the first line I start off with is actually from the NTC CG, Major General Taylor. And I agree with this point. What he will tell you is, if you ask him why the National Training Center exists, his response will be to help the U.S. Army and the United States military and the Joint Force win the first battle of the next war. Not win the current battle, not win the competition fight, win the first major battle of the next major high-end conflict. And that's rooted in history of, think back to World War II, about the African campaign in places like Kasserine Pass, where we fail and we get defeated off the start. But what Americans do is adapt really quickly, and we learn and we change. It kind of takes us a while to get our feet wet. Same thing happened in some of the battles in Korea as well as Vietnam. So NTC was created to prevent that. It started in the early 80s and kind of gained its footing in the mid to late 80s. And then we went and did this thing called Desert Storm. And what did we do? At the time, the Iraqi military was one of the strongest militaries in the world. And we rolled over them really quickly in those first battles of that war. So the value proposition is there. And it's really important in the current day and age, where we have all these threats on the horizon of, there's Russia, Ukraine going on right now. You have the China threat, the China-Taiwan threat, where the threat of high intensity conflict, large military on large military war, large scale combat operations, is very real and relevant. So we're trying, you could see it at NTC, the Army relearning how to do that. There is no counterinsurgency or competition that goes on in an NTC scenario. It is all force, large scale, force on force, brigade combat team versus brigade combat team in the middle of the desert between the rotational brigade and the Black Horse Op 4, which I think is a phenomenal unit. And it is about as close as you can get to simulated conflict.
Yeah.
And I think that whole concept is the same thing we're trying to do with SF, is we are trying to relearn what is our role within large-scale combat operations. Where do we go? Where do we fit into this? How do we integrate with the brigade? Take that a step further with the new FM 3-0 and multi-domain operations, is how does SF operate within multi-domain operations in a large-scale combat environment in conjunction with, large conventional forces. So that's what we're trying to do here. And when you get into value proposition of what does that mean for AOBs and the SF units when they come to NTC, the kind of the tagline we go with is, conduct irregular warfare in the deep operations area to gain relative advantage in the physical, human, and information domains. Sounds a lot like SF, CA, and PSYOPs, which is important to note that if you don't realize it, we train SF, CA, and PSYOPs in every rotation out here. And then how do you employ effects with that? And I think what we're really trying to do is, people say, oh, SF deep sensor. Okay, well, deep sensor kind of sounds a lot like core LURS. That's not what we want to be, right? No. Yes, special reconnaissance is very similar to core LURS. But I think the difference is when you go into the deep operations area and you're in that division battle space, is our value out there is not just to sense and detect and identify, but then for the precision multi-domain effects that we can deliver through our access and placement. So within missions here at NTC, yes, we send the ODAs into the deep operations area. But it's not just to observe, report, and call in fires. They do space disruption missions. They do cyber access missions. Sending, promoting the PSYOP campaigns, promoting the building networks, all that stuff. And then for the AOB, which is actually the primary training audience here, it's how do you mission command all of that? How do you synchronize all those operations? Not just with the SGITF, but with the division. Is the core setting convergence windows for division operations, and what role does SF play in setting conditions within those convergence windows, delivering precision effects in the enemy's rear in support of those convergence windows. And I think that's really where our proposition is. Primarily on the SF side, the PSYOP side is promoting all of that through. It's promoting our campaigns, it's promoting our objectives, but it's also helping shape the enemy's decision making. That's really what we're trying to do within it. And then for CA, how do you support that? The networks for intelligence, for logistics, for medical, as far as supporting operations. But then I think the big picture there is how do you consolidate the gains in LSCO? Because now in LSCO, you're taking back ground, and you have to secure that ground. You have to build off of that ground. It's not enough to just retake it. What are you going to do once you retake it?
Yeah.
Governance and things like that. So that's a long-winded answer for value proposition.
Definitely, but you touched on a lot of good things. Before, you were talking about how on a detachment you were focused on the basics, and then here at the National Training Center you talked about multi-domain operations. So AOBs, or the SF company level and the detachment level, they are integrating effects in the physical or the land, air, space, cyberspace, human and information domains and dimensions. And that's things that are probably pretty hard for them to get after at home station, or especially at the team and company level on their own, because those things take a lot of resources. And the beauty of coming to a combat training center is we have collected all of those resources and we bring them to bear during a rotation so that Blue 4 and the opposing force have those and they can really hit each other with them. And you talked about Black Horse, which is our opposing force here. They're free thinking. They're able to move in the battle space. And we've seen AOBs and detachments, CAT teams, TPTs, everybody get hit in front of the flot, behind the flot. Like, they're everywhere. So no safe spaces in LSCO. A lot of things out here that make it challenging and great training, even though, as you mentioned, the company level is the training audience. So let's touch on that, sir. So why is an SF company the training audience for the National Training Center?
Yeah, I kind of want to first hit the riff off of where you were going with the resources here and what you can get here that you really can't get anywhere else. Because I think it's important to hit, especially if you haven't experienced NTC, you haven't been out here to see it, or you don't have any context for what is capable out here. I mean, you can do almost anything you want out here. Some things take a little further to coordinate, but they're all coordinatable for you to do. And I'll refer back to the NTC CG Major General Taylor, because one, when it's a general saying, it has a little bit more WASA than just old Major Hitzner sitting down here. So it's not taking my word for it. But another thing that makes this place great is the free thinking enemy aspect. I don't know how many other places you go, or even in your PMTs that you create, where the enemy's just left to its own devices and they're trying to win. Black Horse is trying to win.
Yes.
No joke. They take it seriously every time,
Not
to
only
include
that,
against our teams.
Yeah.
So we deliberately try to put them in places in close proximity to Black Horse to keep that pressure on them. Because Black Horse will not just let them sit on mountaintops and rain fires on their high priority targets.
And Black Horse knows the terrain.
And they know the terrain, and they will turn tanks on teams that get sucked in and don't adhere to the threshold of violence principles of old UW, spike, come back down.
Yep.
Now at NTC, we only have a couple days of training, so we just can't have you go to ground for a couple days. But the value that provides of LSCO is, hey, things out here can kill you very easily. And then so just that access and placement, you're in the enemy's rear and you feel like you're in the enemy's rear. And then the effects that you have through multi-domain means will replicate on Black Horse, and then by proxy have those effects. On on the brigade, and you just can't get that anywhere else. Plus, just the amount of terrain and things out here. And it's all real.
Mhm.
Nothing's made up. It's a squadron of armor
Yeah.
out there. Black Horse puts their talks in their CPs out there the whole time. And
Oh,
if you
yeah.
find them, you can kill them and they move. So it's just,
And they do their own deception plans.
and they
stuff,
do
too.
deception plans. It's about as real as you can get. And then that challenge that represents for that AOB of how do I sustain that? How do I support that? You know, they'll struggle through their mission command, but then what really kind of gets them about midway through the rotation was when those ODAs are starting to get black on water and food and they got casualties. And how do you do that in LSCO? Risk to mission, risk to force calls.
Mhm.
How do you leverage all the things available to you? Partner force networks, which, by the way, we bring out a role player partner force leadership as well as just the actual partner force. So you have to deal with all those challenges and leverage everything you have at your disposal in either conventional or non-conventional ways to sustain your force. And what the teams really learn is it's really hard to do that. And it goes right back to the basics of shoot, move, communicate, survive, and medicate. And it's just, I can't find another place where you can do that. And oh, by the way, the things that we're bringing in, spectrum analysis, everything that you do out there is seen either by us, the capability we have on our team, or NTC writ large.
Mhm.
The information environment that exists here, we call it the ION network. It's got all fake social medias. There's news people that are out there. There's newspapers. That entire information environment there is an information war
Oh, yeah.
that goes on here between the Blue Force and the Black Force, and primarily that's the SF guys and the PsyOps guys and the CA guys doing the bulk of it on the Blue Force side. But in the same way, any action that happens on the battlefield here will be amplified either positively, negatively, or just neutral
Mhm.
in the information environment, and will have effects on you. And I don't see that replicated anywhere else. So as far as, it's not perfect.
No.
There are gaps and seams, right? Like we have to bring in some outside resources,
Mhm.
but like we bring those in, cyber kits so you can do cyber operations. Some limited space effects, but we have the capability, we have SMEs here to do space. Those multi-domain effects are able to be achieved as well within the construct of a high intensity conflict combat scenario. So I just kind of wanted to get that out there of the
those all good
value
points.
of this place before I head into the company as the highest level of leadership.
Mhm.
So, NTC trains brigades.
Okay.
And really, we don't, I think what we've realized is in LSCO, an SF company wouldn't really be aligned with a brigade. We think it's more at the division level
For a company. Okay.
or at least in the same battle space. You
Okay.
could probably argue that it could be a company. It might more likely be maybe a SODIF
Mhm.
that's aligned with the division at the headquarters level. But that one company is probably the SF maneuver element on the ground within that division's battle space. And then there's arguments going on about what does the relationship look like at the division level. Is it just the SODIF? Do you put a robust softly? Do you go full SOCC and make that a company mission? Those are all things we're trying to figure out, and we're training them, or we're putting them into practice.
Yeah, it's something we got to test
Into
back in
practice here.
January for
Yes.
the first Armor Division rotation.
Right. But it is really a company level collective training proving ground.
Mhm.
For a company to do mission command of ODAs in the division, in the operational deep,
Mhm.
with a live free thinking enemy. And that's who we're really focused on. Because how often does an AOB get to do that? So it's multi-domain irregular warfare, and how do you mission command that? And we had this discussion about a year or so ago of when we're doing our scenario redesign to kind of modernize that in alignment with the new FM3-0 and multi-domain operations, and where we think SF will operate and how we're going to operate. And if you go back to the doctrine, you can look at an SF company. It could be three things. It could be an an AOB, which is more so mission command, but not necessarily forward to the FLOT or direct liaison with the partner forces. It could be an ODB, which is more operational, what you might think of in UW, area command type operation, or it could actually be a SOC. We settled on AOB. Keep them more so in the rear and do mission command of all those elements out there. Because this is more of an operational environment out here in NTC than it is a tactical environment. NTC's training brigades to put the brigades online. And do the companies and the platoons get phenomenal training in close combat? Absolutely. But what they're really training is that brigade staff, that brigade commander, that brigade staff, and those battalion commanders of how to do mission command at scale against a large enemy. So we're replicating the same thing with the SF side. So it's really on the AOB and the problems that they face of how do I provide mission command and just commander's intent to my ODAs in the deep with, a comms contested environment, an environment where if you're not careful with how you're communicating, that you'll get your teams killed. An environment that is hard to sustain the operations forward, that you have to coordinate. You have to stay ahead of the game. You can't be reactionary. If you're reactionary, you're behind. And it really is an art. How they do mission command, given those constraints and restraints, is more of an art than it is just a doctrinal science. Like, here's mission command, here's your key tasks, here's your purpose. Yes, that's easy, but when you can only send 1 or 2 messages a day, and you want to over like a low vis radio such as a 137. That if you put a whole op order in there, it bogs down and message never goes through. So how can you do that in as few characters, for the modern Twitter community, in as few characters as possible, yet clearly articulate your commander's intent and purpose for that ODA, and they know exactly what you want them to do. 72 hours, 96 hours, however far out in advance, because you're only going to get a report from them maybe once a day, maybe once every other day, depending on the operations, and that they are still aligned and nested within your...
Stressing those mission command systems that you're talking about.
And the same thing with...
You don't get immediate gratification. It's not home station where they're down the hallway, or it's not a coin environment where that you can just pick up a phone and call somebody and get an immediate answer.
So mission command and commander's intent becomes very important. It's the same way... So back here on the trainer side, we represent a SGIF as what we call high com, your higher command. Who you're reporting to, who's giving you orders and guidance. We don't require a single con-op for day-to-day operations. We give a staff mission brief ahead of time, and we listen to their back brief, and we give them the SGIF commander's intent, their ROE, and we just expect you to operate within that because, oh, by the way, the SGIF, we've got SODIFs and multiple other AOBs. We don't have the time. You're always in contact in LSCO. So, there's no such thing as a con-op for an individual mission. You're out there in the deep. You've been specially selected and trained to do irregular warfare and deliver those effects in line with the commander's intent. So we don't need, hey, boss, this is what I want to do. Ask for permission. We've given you your guidance. Operate within it and achieve the commander's intent. So that's really the gist for the AOB. Now I don't want to discount or do a disservice to the training that the ODAs get out there. Are they in the main training obvious? Full transparency? No. But at that level, is the training scenario built to give them the best training possible? 100%. Are the OCs that are out there directly with those guys for the duration, 24/7, for the duration of the 2 weeks they're in the box, is their number one priority to give that ODA the best training possible and help them learn? Absolutely, 100%. And they're really the guys that feel the pressure. When they're out there, one of my favorite things to do is at the end of the rotation in the AR, we always take a picture of like their worst days. Because inevitably, when they're sitting up there on the roof, on the mountaintops, and everything that Black Horse puts out there, and we give them an H-piddle, and all of a sudden they can see all of the H-piddle, and maybe it's been quiet for a day or two, and they want to start producing effects, and then they produce too much effects.
Itching to get something done.
And they're itching to get something done, and they maybe don't understand the H-piddle as well, or they don't understand what's rule number 1, right? Understand your operational environment. You got to understand what's important, and what do I physically need to affect on the battlefield, or what can I report to somebody else, or what can I do that by non-kinetic means? How can I do that more surreptitiously or low-vis or quieter, but still deliver the same effect? But we take a picture of our system that shows all the live Black Horse, and it's like one little blue dot surrounded by all the red, and here's why you had a bad day that day.
Yeah.
And it people's eyes. And then from spectrum management, and I always revert back to the basics, because at NTC, your foundational basics will get exposed. And that's the beauty of the place. And when we put you out there, there's no better way to expose those than under pressure.
Yeah.
So if you have foundational cracks in your basic level training and your SOPs, just putting you out there in the desert in the midst of live Black Horse will expose those. You can get great training as an ODA and take away phenomenal lessons learned and become a better team by just going out there. We don't even have to give you a scenario. Just put you out there, and those little gaps and seams will get exposed just by the pressure that gets put on you just in the natural environment. I go back to one, just surviving as a human. So having enough sustainment, water, food, just to survive in a harsh environment of the desert. And then you're behind enemy lines. So how are you going to get that? Keeping your force alive from kinetic activity, threshold of violence, how much do you go? And then you can do everything perfectly, but it's a live, free thinking enemy. You might have the best MSS you've ever gotten, but on a random, for no other reason than that was the flight path that enemy red air took that day, and they flew over your MSS.
Yep.
Well, guess what? You're compromised even though you did everything perfectly. Right? And that happens here all the time. And it's great. And it's great. Your EW spectrum, your physical, and then surviving based off your physical signature and then your EMS signature. What you think might work from the training you did at home station, when you put it in a live operational environment, some things work, some things don't. And the exposure that you get, and the guys learn from that. And usually we see them come in and they think they're confident in their systems, and we show them why their systems are maybe a little flawed.
Yeah.
And then about halfway through the rotation, they fix them, and they come out here a lot better, especially on the physical and EW spectrum. But then also to go back to training prior to coming to NTC and LSCO, I think on a daily basis, our day job is to go do competition, and that's really important. We're one of the only units in any military that does that on a daily basis in competition. And as far as maintaining our status and our strength in the world, that is incredibly important. We have to do that, but we also have to be prepared for the worst case scenario, and we have to go down range and fight an army. And I think what we've seen out here is training plans aren't necessarily built for high intensity conflict. We kind of train for our day jobs, which we have to, but we have to find a balance, because one of my favorite things is when our leaders come out here and they ask team sergeants halfway through, how would you change your training plan? And they go, I basically have to change it all because it wasn't built for this. And I think at a fundamental level, we have to realize in a training plans that there's got to be a balance between what we're asked in the immediate to go down range to do, but what at any second we might be asked to go do, which is very much different.
With that, we will end this part of our discussion and pick up next time by discussing the training value for SF teams and companies to train for large-scale conflict operations. Thank you for listening to Off the Radar, where SOF prepares for conflict.
You have been off the radar with SOF West.